Hello, my name is Elizabeth Brown. I'm the Program Director for the International Board of Safety Professionals, and our presentation today will be on the Certified Construction Safety Manager course. You can see in our table of contents, we have a lot to cover today. We'll cover construction safety fundamentals, regulatory compliance, along with all the different types of hazard identification and risk assessment, as well as safety management systems for construction, and that will include covering construction site emergency response, behavior-based safety, environmental safety, occupational health, safety training, incident investigation, also legal and ethical considerations for construction safety, construction site safety audits and inspections, safety culture development in construction, leadership and construction safety, and then how you can strive to continuously improve with your construction safety plan. A certified construction safety manager, which this course is covering, is a professional certification that demonstrates that you have the advanced knowledge and expertise to manage safety on construction sites effectively. This certification typically involves meeting specific educational and experience requirements, passing a comprehensive exam, and maintaining the certification through continuing education. Key aspects of the Certified Construction Safety Manager certification include having knowledge of the safety regulations and standards that affect a construction site, as well as understanding risk management tools such as having skills in identifying, assessing, and mitigating construction-related hazards to prevent accidents and injuries. Additionally, you'll need to understand how to develop safety programs, how to design, implement, and manage effective safety programs for construction sites, how to conduct incident investigations, if there were any incidents on your site, having the knowledge and expertise to be able to investigate those properly, identify the root cause of the incident, and develop corrective actions to prevent reoccurrence. Additionally, you'll need to have proficiency and feel confident in delivering safety training, conducting safety meetings, and help create a culture of safety where safety is a priority on your construction job sites. You'll also need to have knowledge of all the regulatory compliance requirements that can apply to your construction job site. And that could include safety and environmental. And that could come from local regulations, state and federal regulations. And you'll also need to be able to develop and implement emergency response plans and ensure preparedness for various types of emergencies. So we are going to dive into this course. Looking at our construction safety fundamentals. Number one, you need to be able to recognize and identify hazards and risk, and be able to perform a risk assessment of those hazards. This is the first step in how we can control hazards to our employees on our work sites. So there's different phases of our hazard identification and risk assessment. We want to first do this at the pre-construction phase. So we want to conduct a thorough site analysis to identify any potential hazards that may exist on the site. Some examples could be uneven terrain, overhead power lines, and underground utilities. Those are things that are often seen on construction sites. Of course, a construction site is ever changing, just from the nature of the business. So we must also have ongoing risk assessment, where we're continuously assessing the risk as the construction progresses and as the site changes. So we need to, identify the hazards, assess the risk, and adjust our safety measures and controls as needed to address these new hazards. Like with any type of safety and health consideration, we want to use a hierarchy of hazard controls that you can see over in this picture on the right. We want to always consider eliminating the hazard as the highest and most effective level of hazard control. If we cannot eliminate it, then we'll work our way down the hierarchy of controls, and then we'll see if we can substitute the hazard, to replace the hazard with something that's less hazardous. And we'll look at some different examples of this as we move through the course. Then we would look at engineering controls. So can we isolate people from the hazards? Administrative controls, can we change the way people work through processes and procedures? And our last resort of hierarchy in the hierarchy of hazard controls is that we'll use personal protective equipment to protect the worker. In general, on most construction sites, there's always going to be some need for personal protective equipment or PPE. However, we want to use this as a last resort because it's least effective. It doesn't protect all employees all of the time. There's plenty of people that still experience injuries because the hazard still exists. It's still out there and can affect the employees when we don't control in any other way besides providing employees PPE. Some construction safety fundamentals outside of hazard awareness and risk assessment is our site organization and housekeeping. And this may seem like a simple thing, but it's a frequently cited standard as something that's not followed in the United States with the OSHA standards, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration standards. And the idea behind housekeeping being something that's frequently cited, meaning it's not followed very often, or when OSHA goes on construction sites or in a general industry setting, they're seeing that housekeeping standards are not being followed. It can just cause a lot of unnecessary hazards for our workers. So examples are maintaining clear pathways, so maintaining a clear and unobstructed pathway in all of our walkways, allowing access routes for workers and equipment to get through, just having a safe way for workers to navigate around the construction site is a good step in the right direction of having a well-organized site and a well-maintained site. Another part of this is our waste management. So implementing effective waste disposal systems, minimizing, debris like our, common excess of material that we might have or trash, making sure that those things are picked up and put away in disposal areas, and preventing tripping hazards. So, not having a lot of extra debris piled up, especially not in walkways, makes the site a lot cleaner and neater and safer. Also ensuring that there is sufficient storage for our tools and equipment, making sure they're stored securely and when they're not in use, can avoid a lot of accidents. It also can avoid the equipment from getting damaged unnecessarily, and it ensures that we have safe tools to work with the following day. Third, like I mentioned, there's almost always a reason for employees to wear personal protective equipment, especially on construction sites. So the use of PPE will typically be needed, but of course we want to consider controlling the hazards using that hierarchy of hazard control before we just prescribe that all employees need to wear PPE. However, on construction sites, there's typically falling or flying object hazards that cannot be avoided, or the potential to bump into overhead objects. So the use of head protection, like a hard hat, eye protection from blowing dust and particles, welding possibly. Also, hearing protection is typically needed if we're operating equipment that is creating high levels of noise. high visibility vests may be needed if we're working around large pieces of heavy equipment. We want to make sure that we're visible to those equipment operators. And then steel-toed boots or safety-toed shoes to ensure that we're protecting our feet from heavy objects getting dropped. Gloves, like hand protection, can protect our hands from sharp objects, splinters, also electrical hazards, chemicals. So gloves may be necessary. Chap pants may also be necessary with certain cutting tools like chainsaws. Excuse me. Excuse me. And then lastly, we may need to utilize personal protective equipment of a fall harness if we have a hazard of falling from heights over 6 feet in the construction industry. Then a fall arrest system may be necessary. Fall arrest systems are also required when workers are working in an aerial lift, and so that's something we'll cover later as well. So if your construction site requires that you utilize and your workers utilize personal protective equipment, then you need to make sure that you also have a schedule for maintaining the PPE, ensuring that workers are trained on the proper use of the PPE and that they're regularly inspecting it and understand when they need to replace damaged or worn PPE to ensure that it's being as effective as possible. Okay, we mentioned having fall protection systems in place on construction sites. And in the last slide with PPE, we talked about fall arrest systems. Fall arrest systems, like we saw, are considered personal protective equipment. So we would want to consider putting employees in fall arrest systems as a last resort. Instead, we want to look at protecting workers from falls using either eliminations or eliminating the need for workers to be working at an elevated height. As technology advances, I've seen the use of drones being used a lot more frequently to minimize the need for employees to work at heights. For example, as a construction safety manager, if you need to inspect a roof or inspect a ladder that goes up 30 feet in the air, if you could use a drone instead of actually physically having to go up there, that is a great example of eliminating that fall hazard. Outside of that, we would then move down that hierarchy of hazard controls, and we would look at engineering controls. And so a great example of engineering controls are installing guardrails and tow boards or barriers around edges, openings, and other fall hazards that are going to be 6 feet or higher, or around any operating equipment that an employee could be harmed by. That is always going to be the preferred method over putting employees in harnesses and lifelines or fall arrest systems. But if we cannot protect the employee using guardrails and barriers or eliminating the hazard, then they will need to be fitted for harnesses and use lifelines, and you will need to ensure that you have a competent person on site to evaluate your fall arrest systems. And one of the biggest challenges I see on construction sites is ensuring that you have anchor points for the fall arrest systems that are sufficiently rated and have been rated by an engineer to state that they can withstand the forces of a fall from a person. So typically those forces, it's all going to depend on the fall height, and those calculations will need to be made by that competent fall person. We need to provide workers training on fall hazards, also provide them training on the proper use of their fall protection equipment, and emergency procedures if a person were to fall. So you would need to have an emergency rescue plan for a worker if they're in a fall arrest system and they do fall and then they're suspended. A person can actually die from actually pretty quickly within 5 to 15 minutes of being suspended in a fall harness, because the fall harness itself cuts off the blood flow to the heart in that main artery in the kind of groin area. So it's very important that if you have workers utilizing fall arrest equipment, that you have an emergency procedure in place on how to get them out of being suspended from that fall as quickly as possible. Scaffolding safety, since scaffolding is another very common way for workers to work at elevated heights, and when done so, they can do so much more safely than working from a ladder or other types of systems. We need to make sure that we are properly erecting and inspecting the scaffolding. This is another system that requires a qualified person to be on site and to inspect the equipment once it's originally erected, and then also regularly inspecting it for structural integrity. We must adhere to the load capacity limits for the scaffolding. We never want to overload the scaffolding because that could lead to a collapse of the scaffolding. And so we want to consider the weight of each worker as well as the equipment that they're and tools they may be using on the scaffolding flooring. We have to provide safe access to and from scaffolding platforms using ladders or stairs. Workers should never ascend the scaffolding by just kind of crawling up the side of it using the bracing, so we'd have to have a ladder installed. Cranes and lifting are also very common on construction sites, so ensuring that you as a construction safety manager understand lifting and rigging safety, and also have qualified operators that have gone through crane training. So we want to make sure that they're only being operated by qualified, authorized operators, and that cranes are regularly inspected for mechanical integrity. You should have your operators conducting pre-shift inspections on the crane. In general industry, like manufacturing settings, a lot of companies work 3 shifts a day, so they're working 24 hours a day. And a crane in that setting should have 3 inspections a day from those operators. If you just have 1 shift on a construction site, then it's fine that that crane is just inspected at the beginning of the shift. But then there are also requirements in the OSHA standards for regular inspections, depending on the use and the severity of use of the crane. And this would need to be done by a qualified crane mechanic that is certified in doing those inspections. And at a minimum, in any kind of use for the cranes, you would need to have them inspected annually. By that, it doesn't have to be an outside person. It certainly could be someone that works for your company, but it needs to be someone that has meets the requirements for having sufficient knowledge and training to conduct those inspections. We also want to use proper rigging practices, so ensuring that operators are properly rigging their equipment and using proper rigging techniques that they should have received in the crane operator training. We're making sure that we're not trying to lift anything that is rated for beyond the load capacity of the equipment. We also want to ensure that the load is stable, balanced, secure before lifting. Electrical safety is and should be a huge priority on construction sites. We want to ensure that if we're working on anything electrical, that we're doing so in a de-energized state. and that we implement lockout tagout procedures to ensure that the unexpected startup of any equipment cannot occur. We also want to ensure that all of our electrical tools are grounded and properly insulated, and that they're rated to be used on construction sites. For our extension cords, we want to make sure that they are rated for use on construction sites. So like extra heavy duty extension cords, like 12 gauge, 10 gauge are typically what you see is considered appropriate on construction sites. Most construction sites occur outside, so we also need to make sure that we're maintaining safe distances from overhead power lines and using spotters when we're working near them, or even if we have a crane operating near them, because any piece of the equipment, the boom, or any part of a person should never come anywhere near within 10 feet of overhead power lines. Some overhead power lines are rated for even higher voltage that dictate that there even needs to be further distance maintained away from those overhead power lines, and that table can be found in the OSHA construction safety standards. Confined spaces can also occur on construction sites. So permit required confined spaces, you need to understand what those are. They can be bodily entered by a person. So it's a space big enough that a person can enter it, but they're not designed for or meant for continuous occupancy. And there's some type of hazard within the space that could affect the employee. And there's also limited egress. So a good example of a permit required confined space would be a grain silo. So there is a hatch or a small, not a pedestrian sized door that someone can access it. You can enter it with your body. It's not designed for continuous occupancy. So examples of being designed for continuous occupancy are that it has lighting and maybe heating and air going to that space. It's not always the case, but those are good examples. And then the grain silo itself may have heat, dust, and then it also has these inwardly converging walls that are designed so when the hatch at the bottom is open, the grain falls out. But if a worker is in that silo and that it's not being controlled for that to happen, then a worker could get engulfed in that material. So with permit required confined spaces, if you have a space that meets all those requirements, then a permit must be completed before entry can occur. It must include conducting atmospheric testing and having continuous monitoring of the air quality inside the space. You must also have an attendant at the entry of the space who keeps constant contact and an inventory of the employees that are inside the space. And you must also develop and practice confined space rescues with trained personnel. The confined space rescues practice must occur on at least an annual basis. And you would just practice the rescue plan that you develop. Ventilation and atmospheric control. You do want to use mechanical ventilation equipment to maintain safe air quality within the confined space. But if that's not possible, then you will need to ensure that employees are wearing appropriate respirators to protect themselves from the atmospheric hazards. We also need to have fire prevention and control on our construction site. We want to make sure that fire extinguishers are placed at strategic locations and ensure workers are trained in their use. I recommend that workers have hands-on training to at least once to practice extinguishing a fire. Your local fire department may be able to come out and help you conduct that training. But a lot of times, if a person has never used a fire extinguisher or extinguished a fire, they oftentimes don't know the proper way to do it. And this, when a fire is occurring, it's an emergency situation, and we want to make sure that people are trained and feel confident in doing the things to help prevent these emergencies from getting worse. Another way to prevent fires is to implement hot work permits. This is for any activities like welding, cutting, brazing, anything that involves open flames or sparks. So in this case, you want to ensure that all combustible materials that could catch on fire have been protected with like welding blankets, or we have swept those things away or stored them in other places before welding occurs. You also don't want to conduct any welding activities around any flammable liquids, anything that a spark or the flame could come in contact with. And then you also want to ensure that you have fire watch personnel that are present for a minimum of 30 minutes after the hot work concludes. You also want to make sure that you have an appropriate emergency response plan in place. You want to develop and communicate an emergency response plan, including evacuation routes and muster points. And your muster points are the places where people will meet in case of evacuation. And so that we all know to meet in this one place or two places. And you have a person responsible there, like a supervisor, that is knowledgeable about how many people were at work that day and are able to account for everyone to ensure that they have reached safety. We also have incident reporting and investigation. You want to make sure that employees are trained and understand that they must report all incidents, near misses, and unsafe conditions immediately. They must conduct thorough investigations of all incidents to identify the root causes and implement corrective action. So once they report this to you or a supervisor, then this is when your role comes into play, where you will be investigating the incident that occurred and identifying the root cause of the incident so that you can appropriately implement corrective actions. You also want to ensure that you're documenting these investigations thoroughly. Having a form on hand for an incident investigation can be helpful, because a lot of times these forms will guide you through ensuring that you have addressed all of the issues that could have occurred. And it also allows you to analyze any trends. Are we seeing this similar incidents occurring, or is it maybe occurring, or a higher level of incidents occurring in a certain location or by a certain department? And so this allows you to analyze trends and help you improve your safety practices. It also can be a regulatory requirement. For example, OSHA has a record keeping rule for injuries and illnesses that requires that you maintain a log of all serious accidents that occur at your site. We must provide our workers training and ensure that we assess their competency to make sure that they are qualified to perform the work for the jobs that they're assigned. So worker training, we want to definitely have a worker orientation. So providing comprehensive safety training before a worker is going to walk on your job site. And then also giving them an orientation on your site-specific hazards. And then we want to offer ongoing training to workers just to keep safety at the top of their minds. Offer it as like refresher courses and training updates. It just helps to demonstrate that you have a safety culture that is positive and promotes safety, and that you value the workers and their safety and health. Again, we want to also conduct competency assessments, especially for any type of equipment operation. to ensure workers are qualified to operate that equipment in a safe manner. For emergency preparedness, not only do we need to have a written emergency response program, but we also want to ensure that that we have appropriate first aid available on site, and that workers are trained in basic first aid procedures. You want to make sure that the ANSI standard, there's an ANSI standard for first aid kits that give guidelines for like minimum things you should have in a first aid kit. But most commercially available first aid kits that you can buy that are prepackaged will have everything you need and you can get them specifically for construction sites too. It is important that workers also trained in basic first aid, and I would include basic first aid to include that workers should be trained in cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR procedures, and also how to use automated external defibrillator or an AED. I also strongly recommend, while this is outside of what we consider basic first aid, that there is an AED available on each job site. If you have an employee that experiences cardiac arrest, the very quick use of CPR in conjunction with an AED is the only proven thing to give a person a chance at survival. And a person's chance at survival decreases for every minute that passes when they're in cardiac arrest that they do not have CPR and have the use of an AED. Construction sites can be somewhat in remote areas, or they can be difficult for your emergency response in the area to get to. So again, that's why I recommend that if at all possible, if you don't have one, that you add that to your safety toolkit. We also want to conduct regular emergency drills, so including fire drills, severe weather drills, I would add to this, and evacuation exercises, especially because the construction site is ever changing. We want to make sure that workers are always aware of our evacuation practices and our muster points, especially if they change, to ensure that in the case of an actual emergency, workers are better prepared to act calmly and safely. We also want to ensure that we have reliable communication systems for coordinating emergency responses, that we're able to communicate to employees that an evacuation is necessary, and that we're able to communicate with external help, our fire department, our emergency medical rescue, police possibly, and making sure that we have a reliable way to do that. With our regulatory compliance, we have local and national regulations. So you as the construction safety manager need to ensure that you understand the local, state, and national regulations that apply to your construction site. You must understand what those regulations state about how often you should conduct inspections and audits. But even if you're in a situation where there are no specific standards for conducting safety inspections and audits, we do want to make sure that we're still conducting those to ensure that we are assessing hazards and doing continuous risk assessment. So this would help us comply with our own internal safety policies, but it also helps ensure compliance with those local and national regulations. And a very good practice for a competent certified construction safety manager is to document everything you do. I can't really stress that enough, because I've been involved in many regulatory agency inspections, and they ask for a lot of documentation for you to show proof that you do have the safe workplace that you're stating that you do. So any safety policies, safety procedures, anytime you conduct training, anytime you can do inspections or audits, you want to make sure that you're recording that in some way. It can be as simple as having a printed form that you fill out, writing notes and keeping those, or there are also quite a few different apps that you can access on a cell phone or a tablet that are pretty useful for keeping track of these types of documents. Okay, so we've got our construction safety fundamentals. So the fundamental principles of construction safety provide us a strong foundation for maintaining a safe construction site. They help to reduce the risk of accidents and ensure compliance with safety regulations. Regulatory compliance are laws that we have to comply with in the country that we're in, the state that we're operating in. And these are they are also, the words that we use interchangeably for this are construction safety regulations and standards. These are critical for you to understand to ensure that construction sites are safe for workers, the public, and the environment. So we're going to get a detailed overview here of the key regulatory frameworks and standards that govern construction safety. In the United States and commonly seen in other countries as not, I wouldn't say the gold standard, but is relied on as the regulations to comply with are OSHA, or Occupational Safety and Health Administration standards that we have in the United States. We have different sets of standards based on the category of work for OSHA, and so the standards that you see here for construction are going to start with 1926. So that first bullet point there, where you see it says 1926, you will know that those are construction safety standards. These are the primary set of regulations for construction safety. It covers a wide range of safety aspects that we've discussed here, such as fall protection, scaffolding, ladders, evacuations, excavations, electrical safety, anything that might occur on a construction site. When you see the OSHA standards, OSHA 29, CFR 1910, those are primarily focused on general industry, where, typically what we think of as like manufacturing buildings. But some standards in these regulations can apply to construction sites, particularly in areas like personal protective equipment and hazardous materials. So it's good that you know both sets of these standards. Another set of standards that are commonly referenced are the ANSI A10 standards. These give us a series of guidelines for various construction activities, including scaffolding, roofing, and demolition. These standards complement the OSHA regulations and offer best practices that are highly recommended that you, as that construction safety manager, familiarize yourself with, get yourself a copy of these, and implement them into your written safety programs and daily practices. The ANSI Z359 series focuses on fall protection and is widely referenced in construction for developing fall protection plans and systems. Other standards that are commonly referenced in the OSHA standards are the National Fire Protection Association standards, along with the NEC, the National Electrical Code. And the NFPA 70 is related to electrical safety on construction sites, and it covers installation practices, grounding, and circuit protection. The NFPA 241 addresses fire protection during construction, renovation, and demolition, and provides guidelines for fire safety management on job sites. The International Standards Organization is also a great place to go to for creating safety management systems, quality management systems, and environmental management systems. And so you can see in this first bullet point, the ISO 45001 is considered an international standard for occupational health and safety management systems. And this provides a framework for managing safety on any type of job site. So you can tailor this for it to be specific for your construction site. And it provides a framework for you to approach safety in a proactive way instead of a more reactive way where a lot of companies tend to approach safety where they're reacting to an incident that occurred and what I call kind of a metaphor like fighting fires instead of trying to prevent the fire from occurring. ISO 9001 is focused on quality management. This standard often is intersects and is used in combination with safety regulations, especially ensuring safety procedures are integrated in overall project management. So that's another good one for you to look at. Other types of government regulations include environmental regulations that can affect your construction site. So the EPA or Environmental Protection Agency regulations can also impact construction safety, particularly in areas dealing with hazardous waste, water runoff, and air quality. Typically, construction sites are required by EPA to have a stormwater permit because we have water that can run off, we can have erosion that can occur, and we need to ensure that we are protecting any storm drains from the silt and the large amounts of silt and construction debris from going into them. Also, we have NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. This requires construction projects to assess their environmental impact, which can include safety-related concerns like exposure to hazardous materials. Additionally, the widely adopted in the United States International Building Code provides safety standards for construction materials, structural integrity, and fire resistance. And a lot of local building codes follow the International Building Code, but sometimes you may see local building codes that have additional requirements based on the specific, typically geology of, or maybe potential natural disaster hazards that can occur in these areas. Building sites that might be along coastal regions where hurricanes or tsunamis or high winds or high water levels can be experienced, they would have additional building codes on top of the International Building Code. Other best practices and industry standards, NACER, the National Center for Construction Education and Research, provides a lot of great standardized training and certification courses for various construction trades, and they emphasize safety best practices. And the Association of General Contractors has a safety manual that offers guidelines and best practices for implementing safety programs on construction sites. So these are all great resources for you as the certified construction safety manager to go to implement or revise or improve your existing safety programs to ensure that you are keeping up with the current best practices. One thing to emphasize with regulatory compliance with OSHA in particular and other regulatory agencies, they really emphasize the importance of worker rights. And a fundamental mission of OSHA is their emphasis of that workers have a right to a safe and helpful working environment at all times. They also have a right to be informed of hazards that exist at their job site. They have the right to receive proper training on those hazards, and they have the right to refuse unsafe work. This is a very specifically protected right. There's a series of steps that must be met before a worker can refuse to perform unsafe work. But I do want to just bring your attention to that as the certified safety manager. If you have a worker stating that they're refusing to do work because they consider it unsafe, that you take that seriously and try to assess those hazards and ensure that it is safe for them to proceed. And if it's not, then we need to properly address those hazards and make it safer before anyone were to work in that environment. Employers are responsible for providing a safe working environment, which includes ensuring compliance with all the relevant regulations, providing necessary safety training, and maintaining records of incidents and training. Enforcement of these regulations, and there are penalties for companies that do not comply with the OSHA standards. So non-compliance can result in fines, penalties, and legal action. OSHA does conduct regular site inspections and can issue citations and penalties for non-compliance. In severe cases, non-compliance can lead to your project being shut down. It can lead to increased insurance premiums and can damage a company's reputation. All right, so we see in this regulatory compliance overview that the regulatory compliance is there for a reason. It's there to keep your workers safe on your construction site, but ensuring compliance with those regulations does help you meet those legal requirements, but it also ensures that you're protecting the lives and well-being of the people that are working for your company and the contractors working on your job site and the surrounding public that may be just walking under your job site or near your job site. We're protecting them as well. All right, we're going to look at some different types of hazard identification and risk assessment tools. Conducting this in construction requires advanced techniques to understand how to address the complex and dynamic natures of construction sites. So we're going to look at some of the different methods to do that. A common tool to address hazard identification and to conduct risk assessment is to first conduct a job safety analysis. This breaks each job task down into steps, and it identifies potential hazards at each step, and then we recommend control measures for each hazard. So I like to do job safety analysis in a spreadsheet where you have the first column as the job step, the second column as the hazards identified, and then the third column as the hazard controls. The mitigation for the hazards helps to provide specific guidance to workers on how to implement controls, such as engineering controls, administrative, and personal protective equipment. JSAs, as well as any other types of hazard identification and risk assessment, are most effective when they're conducted in groups or conducted by multiple people, and then you come back together as a group to compare notes, ensuring that we have considered all the different aspects of the construction site. Another tool is the failure modes and effects analysis, or FMEA. We also work with a team on the FMEA. We work making sure that we have all the team of experts that are able to systematically identify and evaluate failure points that can occur in a process or system. Then you're going to assess the impact of that occurring, the likelihood of it occurring, and the detectability of failures. Then with our mitigation, we're going to prioritize risks based on their severity and likelihood, allowing for targeted interventions to prevent those failures. A bow tie analysis is another commonly used analysis that surrounds the idea of looking at a risk event And then we have a fault tree analysis and an event tree analysis to map out pathways from potential hazards to outcomes. This all also lets us identify prevention methods and mitigation controls. So this provides a visual tool to understand risk pathways and allows us to implement controls at multiple stages to prevent incidents and to mitigate their consequences. A LOPA, or layer of protection analysis, evaluates the effectiveness of existing controls and determines if additional layers of protection are needed. So it helps us in identifying weak spots in our current safety measures and ensures that there are sufficient independent layers of protection. A HAZOP study, or hazard and operability study, involves, again, a team from different departments that go through and systematically review the construction processes. They use guide words to prompt discussions on potentials of deviations from design or operational intent. And then the mitigation occurs when they are ensuring that thorough evaluation of potential hazards and leading to recommendations for design improvements or procedural changes. Quantitative risk assessment. Quantitative means that we're using statistical methods and historical data to quantify the likelihood and impact of various risks. So we're not just qualitatively using our senses to go out into the workplace, but we're looking at existing historical data. And then we're using that to mitigate hazards by allowing this to help support decision making by providing a numerical basis for comparing risks. And this allows us to determine the most effective mitigation strategies. Root cause analysis is very commonly used in incident investigation. This helps us to identify the underlying causes rather than just the symptoms of an incident. Another training course that I have a picture of a tree that I really like when we're looking at incident investigation. And if you can imagine a tree, out in the limbs, we've got leaves, and the leaves on the tree represent the outcomes that occurred from the incident. Maybe a worker injury, a worker fractured their arm, or a fire occurred, and there was damage to the building. So then the branches and the main, the trunk of the tree are going to be the direct or indirect causes of that outcome happening. A fire happened. Well, we don't quite know why the fire happened. Or when the worker fractured their arm, their truck's brakes failed and it hit a wall when they were driving it. It's an example of an incident that we go through. Well, why did the brakes fail? Why did the truck hit the wall? Then we get down to the roots that grow into the ground that are really fundamentally the reasons why the fire occurred or the brakes failed and the truck hit the wall and the worker broke their arm. And so in that example, we would see that maybe we didn't have an effective preventative maintenance program to ensure that someone was inspecting that truck to ensure that the brakes were in proper condition. And we could do the same thing looking at a root cause of why a fire started. So root cause analysis is a fundamental tool that if you're not using, you need to become familiar with, as is very much necessary to use in any incident investigation, but any type of potential hazard you see or any near miss that gets reported, root cause analysis is the best tool you can use to determine what the root cause is, and it helps you develop long-term solutions to address the fundamental issue there instead of just trying to address the surface kind of issues that are occurring. Implementing these types of techniques, because these are projects, right? We can't just say we're going to conduct a hazard investigation and risk assessment and it's all done in one day. So you do need, we need to assemble a team. We need to integrate these techniques early in our project lifecycle from the project itself of the construction site. It needs to be integrated and a part of influencing our design, planning, and execution of our construction at all phases. We also want to ensure that we're continuously monitoring and reviewing our hazard assessments. This is particularly important on construction sites because the project conditions are often changing. We also want to engage all stakeholders in our safety program and in our hazard investigations and risk assessment. And we want to include our workers, management, subcontractors. This allows us that we have to have a comprehensive approach to hazard identification and risk management. Okay, because I'm sure all can recognize that the construction industry is often very fast-paced. We're often working at under deadlines and very hurried, and we also have a lot of hazards along with this ever-changing work environment. So because of this, it's important in any industry that we implement an effective safety management system. But it's maybe even more important that we do so on a construction site. So we're going to look at some strategies for safety management systems that address the unique challenges that are experienced on complex dynamic construction sites. So what is a safety management system first? So safety management system in construction is a proactive approach to identifying hazards and managing risk on a job site. It focuses on preventing accidents rather than reacting to them. So we talked earlier about being proactive and versus reactive, and this safety management system provides us the framework to do that. So health and safety regulations have evolved over the past century. We've had significant advancements, though, in our safety management systems in the past 15 to 20 years, which has transformed safety management from just like having just paperwork to fill out to becoming kind of a living, breathing thing. So we do document things, and we do have written safety management systems. But written in those safety management systems are processes that provide adaptive, dynamic solutions to these dynamic issues we have on construction sites. So the goals of a safety management system in the construction industry focus on immediate safety concerns and broader organizational and regulatory priorities. These goals can be categorized into distinct areas, and they all contribute to the overall effectiveness and efficiency of construction operations, along with increasing construction site safety. So it does lower accident rates. They do boost productivity. They ensure that your company and you're complying with the laws and regulations that apply to you. It can make you more attractive to an insurance company, so you're have a higher ability to have lower insurance rates and better insurability, and it can increase employee satisfaction. Because I always say that a healthy worker that's not injured and it doesn't hurt to come to work is going to be a much happier worker. All right, so our construction site emergency response, importance of emergency preparedness in construction. This is going to be a big part of your safety management system, is ensuring that in our construction sites that are high risk, that we have great processes in place that address any foreseeable accident that could occur on site. And that could be anything from a fire structural collapse, severe weather, issues with heavy machinery, hazardous materials, any of those things we need to plan for and properly implement action, and train employees on what those actions will be. Key components of emergency preparedness planning, going back to what we've talked a lot about today, risk assessment and hazard identification. So what are the potential emergencies that could occur on your site? We need to plan for and prepare for those. Fires, floods, chemical spills, types of severe weather. We need to evaluate the likelihood of those hazards occurring and the severity of those hazards if they were to occur. And then we want to document the findings and update those risk assessment and hazard identification practices regularly, and especially as conditions change. One example, a simple example of conditions that can change during a construction project would just be the change of season. Right now, where I am in the United States, we're in the middle of summer, and it's very hot and humid where I live. And so all of the workers that I work with, we're having to ensure that they're not being overly exposed to heat stress, and ensuring that we're offering mitigation practices for that. Plenty of water with electrolytes, shade, extra breaks, opportunity for cooling down periods, and then all of the workers are trained on heat stress first aid and on recognition of signs of heat stress, so that we are recognizing that and looking out for each other and ensuring that those hazards aren't happening. We also want to develop and have a detailed emergency response plan. This is going to outline the procedures to follow during an emergency. We want to include all roles and responsibilities and communication protocols, evacuation routes, and assembly points. We want to make sure that the emergency response plan is site-specific and considers the unique risks of the construction project. We also want to ensure that we have effective communication systems in place to alert workers and first responders during an emergency. We want to make sure that all workers understand these systems. So these systems can include alarms, can include, sirens. We just want to make sure that workers are trained and understand what those alarms mean. We also can use radio communication and emergency contact numbers, as long as everyone has sufficient access to telephones. We also want to conduct regular emergency response training and drills to ensure workers are familiar with the emergency response plan. And the best way to do these is to simulate various emergency scenarios to test the effectiveness of the plan and identify areas for improvement. We want to coordinate with local emergency services to establishing those relationships with your fire department, police, your emergency medical responders, and providing them site-specific information is a really proactive way to ensure that you will receive the assistance you need in the case of an emergency. Conducting joint drills with these services is also a great idea to ensure that there's seamless coordination in an actual emergency. In general, I've experienced that fire departments in particular are very happy to conduct these joint drills with you, or at a minimum come on site and tour your site so they can understand the specific hazards that you have there, so that they're prepared to properly respond in an emergency. So that's a great way to build relationships with your local community. I always recommend that if you're going to invite these local emergency services on your site, to extra encouragement is to offer to provide them lunch. So, free food always is a plus for everyone. So, offering to provide them lunch, being very grateful and thankful that they're there, and emphasizing that we are all working as a team to ensure the safety of our workers and the public. We also want to manage our safety during construction emergencies in terms of our immediate response. We need to have a plan in place on how we're going to activate the emergency alarm, if we're using one, or who will announce on the radio, or our emergency phone number message that may go out. Who is going? So we need all this written out in our emergency response plan. Whose responsibility is it? And always consider having multiple substitutes for that person. That's the primary emergency coordinator or response person, because people do sometimes miss work for being sick or going on vacation. So you want to make sure that you have alternate people in place to be responsible to sound the alarm if needed. We want to follow our emergency response plan if any evacuation needs to occur. And then also we want to prioritize providing first aid to injured workers and ensuring the safety of all personnel. One possible thing to consider implementing in your emergency response plan is an incident command system. And this is something that you may see in the ANSI Z10 or the ISO 45001 safety management systems, is for you to determine an incident command structure who would manage the emergency. We would designate an incident commander, and again, ensuring we have an alternate to fill in case that person is not available that day. And also designating key roles. So safety officer, liaison officer, maybe a communications officer. So designating someone that would speak to, in terms of public relations, like to the press or media, someone that would communicate with your local emergency services, but ensuring that we have clear communication between the command center and field teams is a priority as well. We also want to ensure that we have evacuation plans in place, and we have a way to account for or ensure that all workers have safely exited the site if evacuation is necessary, and that they have assembled at our muster points, our designated assembly points. So using a head count system to ensure all workers are accounted for. That involves ensuring that we know who all is at work each day. So typically your superintendents or your supervisors are going to be the best people to conduct those head counts and then report up the incident command structure, whether you're missing anyone or if everyone is accounted for. Employees should be trained and know that they should only re-enter the job site once it has been declared safe by the incident commander or the local emergency services. You, as the certified construction safety manager, will want to work with your team to conduct a thorough investigation post-incident. So if there is an incident that occurs where emergency response is needed or evacuation is needed, we want to conduct that post-incident analysis to identify the root causes to ensure that this incident will not occur in the future. When doing that, you want to also review the effectiveness of your current emergency response plan, and you may see that you may need to make necessary revisions to the plan based on your post-incident analysis. You also want to obviously provide immediately before your post-incident analysis medical attention to any workers that need that. And then depending on the severity of the incident, you may need to provide counseling and support to affected workers that were involved in the incident. Just like with all systems, we want to practice a process of continuous improvement. So we want to, in that post-incident analysis, We want to discuss and document the lessons learned from each emergency response and incorporate them into our emergency response plan. And we want to share these insights with our entire construction team. This allows them to understand, what the truth was behind what occurred. Because sometimes, rumors can occur and truth can get blurry. But it also allows them to understand what mitigation strategies you are putting in place to ensure that their safety is very important to you and to the company, and that this incident won't occur in the future. We also want to provide regular updates. So we want to update the emergency response plan regularly to reflect changes in site conditions. If our personnel changes, we may need to change our names out on our incident command or our emergency coordinator. Or if we identify any new risks, we need to incorporate those into our emergency response plan. And we all, of course, want to ensure that all workers stay up to date and informed on any of these changes, and they would need to receive additional training on the emergency response plan if these were to occur. All right, so again, with our construction site emergency response, conducting this and all of the aspects that we've discussed to this point ensures that your emergency preparedness plan complies with our local, state, and federal regulations. But you may need to check your local regulations to ensure that your plan meets all of the elements of the regulations. So you want to stay informed of any regulatory changes, and you also want to update your emergency response plan and all of your other safety plans accordingly if these were to occur. So by integrating these practices into your daily operations of your construction site, you're going to be much more proactive about the safety on your site. You'll be able to successfully manage an emergency and minimize its impact. If an emergency were to occur, your ability to do that will be significantly increased. So this is that proactive approach we've been talking about. It definitely takes extra effort on the front end, but it is definitely worth it in being proactive and preventing or minimizing the outcomes if an emergency is to occur. We're going to talk for a minute about behavior-based safety programs in construction. So behavioral-based safety is an approach that construction companies can use that can help to improve their safety culture and working conditions on a job site. So behavior-based safety is based on the theory that positive and negative reinforcement, just feedback can influence future behaviors of workers. So, we would look at positive and negative feedback. But so, for example, if a worker reports an observed safety violation, they could be positively reinforced with feedback of a reward. There's all different types of behavior-based safety systems. You can come up with your own about what that reward would look like. Some companies will collect all the reports from workers in a month of observed safety violations, and then they'll have a drawing for gift cards, or they'll have lunch, a free lunch for everyone that did this, or at their safety meeting, they'll celebrate safety by having a free lunch. We've talked a good bit about how free food is a big encourager for a lot of people. So as a result, the idea is that worker is positively encouraged to be on the lookout or observing safety violations so that they can report them again and maybe have another reward. On the other side of this, there are also negative reinforcers and consequences like punishments for undesirable behavior. So if a worker breaks a safety rule, like for example, let's say they're not wearing their safety glasses, then there would be some type of negative consequence typically using a progressive disciplinary action scale for safety is what's commonly seen on construction sites. So, maybe the first time someone is observed not wearing their safety glasses, you have a verbal reprimand. So just, reminding the worker to wear their safety glasses. That if it occurs again, then they would have a written reprimand that would go in their employment file. And then from, so many written reprimands, then they might be suspended from work without pay, and then it can ultimately lead to termination. So to implement behavior-based safety in a construction setting, you want to keep on top of incident and accident records. It can gain some knowledge on positive versus negative reinforcement. So I would say from my experience that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution with behavior-based safety for every company. So if you're interested in implementing this, then by all means, do some research and try out a method you think will work for your company. But be open to being flexible to modifying if you don't see that it's giving you the results that you're hoping for. This does make use of direct punishment to change behavior. So that it does use, but also does make use of direct reward to change behavior. So it's definitely a way to promote the fact that there are consequences to our actions. And it can help workers see and reinforce the idea that positive safety habits lead to positive consequences like rewards, and negative safety habits lead to negative consequences like punishment. Let's talk about environmental safety on construction sites, because managing these environmental factors in construction safety involves addressing risk posed by the environment. And so this is something that is unique to construction sites that can cause that the site to be that ever-changing kind of nature of the site. So we need to ensure that we're aware of the weather conditions at all times. Employees can have a lot of safety hazards from being exposed to extreme heat and cold. So, like I mentioned, we're right in the middle of summertime, very hot, very humid where I live. So you need to make sure that we have hydration stations. Employees are being offered not just water, but water with electrolytes to replace those electrolytes that are lost when we have high amounts of sweating due to high heat. That we have cooling stations in the winter, warming shelters in the summer. Sorry, other way around for me. In the summer here, we need to have cooling stations and warming shelters in the winter when it's very cold for us here. And then you may need to adjust work hours. I have a client that processes coke and coal and using really large ovens. And so it's hot year round at that facility, but the workers that have to work around the ovens in the summer is especially dangerous. And so they actually hire kind of a relief shift. And the workers only work around those hot ovens in the summer for 30 minutes at a time. And then the other 30 minutes, they go into an air-conditioned break room. And those workers, so they basically hire two people to work a one-man shift to ensure that workers aren't experiencing excessive heat exposure. Also, in open construction sites outside, you have to be aware of rain and storms, using non-slip surfaces, ensuring workers have safety footwear that has like a non-slip sole, securing loose material, ensuring proper drainage to prevent flooding, making sure that those drains aren't getting clogged or blocked by loose material that can run off when we have flooding and rain. or not getting clogged by the silt and loose dirt on the site. So we often use silt fences and socks that have straw in it outside those drains to ensure that the water can flow through and additional flooding doesn't occur. And also with storms, we need to be aware of lightning and have a lightning plan where equipment operators and workers are getting to a safe location whenever lightning has the potential of being nearby. Wind is also an issue, especially workers working at heights and with scaffolding and cranes potentially. Also, if any worker is in an elevated area like a scissor lift, an aerial boom lift, any winds over 30 miles an hour is probably way too high for a worker to be working at those heights. So that's something that needs to be written into your all of your plans that address working at heights, and ensuring that we're following that, ensuring that you as the construction safety manager or an alternate person are monitoring the weather at all times. Having an app with alerts set up on your phone is always a good idea, and always having a way to alert your crane operators, or having a plan in place to delay high-risk activities during crane operations when we have high winds is definitely a best practice. Air quality can also be affected by construction activities. So we always want to control any dust to protect workers from those airborne hazards, but also to minimize airborne particulates for the nearby area. So we want to use wet suppression methods whenever possible. We want to vacuum up dust instead of sweeping it. There's been a big focus with OSHA recently about silica exposure for construction workers. So we want to make sure that we're using appropriate PPE and appropriate dust control methods to prevent silica exposure. And again, OSHA has recently, they have put out, in the silica standard, there is a table that lists the appropriate control methods for silica exposure on construction sites. And this would be a great table for you to understand and implement into your silica exposure and your air quality programs. But some of the main takeaways from that is that they prohibit the use of sweeping up dust on construction sites because of the potential for it to spread throughout the area. And so we want to make sure we're using kind of wet suppression methods to keep that dust knocked down. Noise pollution can also be an issue for the workers on the job site, but also for the surrounding public. So we want to utilize noise barriers, maintain our equipment to reduce noise, and provide hearing protection. If our noise levels are over 90 decibels, we want to regularly monitor our noise levels using dosimeters, where workers wear a dosimeter near their hearing level on their shoulder for an 8-hour shift. You also can get a sound level meter to spot check your sound levels to kind of regularly monitor those as well. Water and waste management are also important on our construction site. So our water management, we want to ensure that we're controlling our runoff. We're implementing sediment control measures such as silt fences and sediment basins. We're developing flood response plans and elevating key infrastructure when necessary. With waste management, we want to make sure that all of our hazardous waste is properly labeled, stored, and disposed of per the local or state or national regulations. We want to implement recycling programs for materials like concrete, metals, and woods. Anything that we can either minimize how much waste we have or recycle, have specific areas for those materials to be collected so that they can be recycled. We also want to use containment systems to prevent any spills of hazardous materials from leaching into the soil and then they're into the groundwater, and then have spill kits on site to manage accidental releases. And an example of an accidental release where a spill kit would be appropriate could even just be spills of oils or leaks of oil that may occur from your crane operating on site. You'd want to get that cleaned up as quickly as possible. Our soil and ground conditions, we want to make sure that we have proper erosion control methods, like erosion control blankets, using vegetation and retaining walls to stabilize the soil. Any contaminated land, we must conduct soil testing and remediation before construction begins. And remediation means removal of any contamination. We also have to consider our ecological impact and ensure that our wildlife is protected. So if there are any types of protected habitats or species found on the construction site, this can definitely affect the construction project, and that would have to get those protected habitats or species may have to get relocated, or you have to get approval from the government to continue with construction activities. Vegetation management, we also want to avoid unnecessarily clearing or deforestation of our area, or we may look to implement reforestation practices and landscaping post-construction to ensure that we are keeping proper levels of vegetation in those areas where we're building new things. So ensuring that we're considering these environmental factors in our safety program is important, but we also need to consider that doing so, we need to ensure that we're complying with our environmental compliance, because we talked about we have the Environmental Protection Agency and different agencies that regulate environmental compliance, and they can be local, state, and federal environmental regulations. To do so, to ensure that we're complying with these regulations, we can perform environmental impact assessments that can be conducted to understand potential environmental impacts and develop mitigation strategies. So by managing all these environmental factors, construction projects can minimize risk, enhance worker safety, and reduce the project's ecological footprint. So let's talk about some occupational health hazards in construction. We've talked about specific safety hazards, but occupational hazards can affect the long-term health and well-being of workers. So some key aspects to consider are noise exposure. So high levels of noise and continuous exposure to high levels of noise from machinery, tools, and heavy equipment can lead to hearing loss. And hearing loss, once it occurs, there's no treatment for replacing it or repairing it or reversing it. So we need to ensure that we're focusing on ensuring that does not occur for our employees. Management of this, we want to implement engineering controls like sound barriers, regular noise monitoring, providing hearing protection, and conducting training on noise hazards. Respiratory hazards, we want to ensure that workers are protected from exposure to dust, asbestos, silica, any type of hazardous fumes, and other airborne contaminants that may lead to respiratory illnesses. And an example of these are silicosis, which is exposure to silica dust, and then asbestosis, which is being exposed to those asbestos fibers that's found in asbestos products, like ceiling tiles, certain breaks, anything that was built before the 1980s in the United States, but there's still asbestos in like ships. So there's asbestos still found in a lot of things, and so we need to make sure that we're aware of those hazards and we're protecting workers using ventilation systems, dust suppression systems, and then a last resort using a respirator, but making sure that the mask or respirator that we're using is rated to protect the worker from the hazard that exists. And when we implement a respiratory protection program, we need to ensure that workers are having medical evaluations to ensure that they're medically fit to wear a respirator. And then we do annual fit tests to make sure that the respirator is fitting the face correctly and protecting the worker effectively. And then if you in particular know, say for example, your workers are exposed to silica dust, make sure you understand the regulatory standards on silica, because it does require that you conduct air monitoring to determine what are the levels of silica on your work site and how much silica exposure the workers are exposed to. And it may require you to have medical surveillance monitoring for your workers where they have chest x-rays to determine if there's any, having continuous health surveillance and monitoring on the chest, lung x-rays to ensure that the worker's not being exposed to enough silica that's causing what looks like could lead to silicosis. Chemicals exposure. So if workers are handling or working near hazardous chemicals such as solvents, adhesives, paints, these can lead to skin conditions, respiratory issues, and other health problems. We want to make sure that all of those containers are properly labeled, that they're being stored in the proper manner and handled per the procedures found on the safety data sheet, and that they're using the personal protective equipment as prescribed by the manufacturer and found on the safety data sheet. We want to ensure proper ergonomics for employees. So employees that repeat tasks at a high rate, they sit or stand in awkward positions. They're manually handling materials, so they're lifting heavy amounts of materials frequently. All of these things can lead to musculoskeletal disorders, which can cause long-term hazards for employees, long-term effects, and can be very costly to the company. So you need to manage this by conducting ergonomic assessments, provide training to workers on safe lifting techniques, and encourage the use of mechanical aids like cranes or other types of lifts that take the stress off the worker from having to manually lift things. And then also an option is job rotation to minimize strain, or encouraging the use of a buddy lift system for certain materials that may be extra long or heavy. So that's kind of up to you as the construction safety manager to determine what that threshold is of when a mechanical lift may be needed or a team lift may be needed. Vibration exposure is something also commonly seen as an occupational health hazard on construction sites due to vibrating tools that are commonly used. So prolonged use of vibrating tools can cause hand-arm vibration syndrome. And a common symptom of hand-arm vibration syndrome, or HAVS, is a person's fingers, as you can see in this picture, turn literally white, and they lose sensation. They're numb, or their fingers can be numb or tingly, and they can't feel anything with their fingertips. So this is caused by the vibration of the tool, causes the loss of circulation in the fingertips, and can even end up causing a person to lose strength in their hands where they can't pick up heavy objects like they have in the past. So that is something you need to train employees on that use vibration equipment tools, so that they can report those early warning symptoms, so that you can effectively address those issues. Management for this is regularly maintaining vibration tools, using vibration dampening tools, There's also types of gloves that can be used that help reduce vibration impact on the worker's hands, limiting exposure time, and then performing health monitoring. Heat stress, we've talked about. Working in hot, especially humid environments in the summer can lead to heat-related illnesses like heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. And heat stroke can be fatal. So we need to make sure that workers are all trained on the signs and symptoms of heat stress. Heat cramps are the first sign that when we get muscle cramps, when we're working in the heat, are the first sign that we're experiencing some type of heat stress. And so workers would need to get themselves into some shade and drink fluids until they feel better, fluids with electrolytes in particular, because we want to prevent something more serious like heat exhaustion or heat stroke from occurring. Heat stroke, though, if a worker is experiencing body temperatures rising over 104 degrees, this is becoming a life-threatening situation, and emergency first aid practices would need to be implemented, like moving the worker to a cool area, removing any excess clothing, cooling the person down with cold water or an ice bath if possible, placed near cooling areas, and then seeking medical attention. So ways to prevent this are providing adequate hydration, providing shaded rest areas, having work rest cycles, and training workers on recognizing symptoms of heat stress. We also want to make sure that we have appropriate wash facilities. So having access to water and hygiene facilities, or welfare facilities as they may be called, but having proper facilities where we have clean drinking water, restrooms, washing facilities for people to wash their hands, and break areas is crucial to ensure a worker's well-being, especially on a construction job site. So these restrooms and washing facilities can be of portable nature, but you need to ensure that they're being maintained and they're clean, because this could lead to health hazards from being exposed to bacteria that can lead to workers getting sick. But we do this to meet the legal requirements and make sure that everything's regularly maintained. We also want to ensure that we're addressing workers' mental health. Construction sites can be high stress environments. Workers can work long hours. Sometimes there can be job insecurity. All of these things can contribute to worker mental health issues. So having employee support programs, mental health programs, encouraging work-life balance, and providing access to counseling services helps to foster a supportive workplace culture, and ensuring that mental health issues are not considered a stigma that you can't talk about. Making sure that workers' mental health can contribute to your safety culture just as much as anything else. We also need to ensure that we are conducting surveillance on all of these occupational health issues by regularly performing health checks and monitoring employees to identify early signs of work-related health issues. So, you being aware of what those early signs are, training employees of what those early signs are so that they can report them, helps to really mitigate those health hazards from becoming worse or more serious issues in the future. So you would need to develop a health surveillance program that is tailored to the specific hazards and risks that are found on your construction site, and conduct regular assessments and follow-ups. For all of these occupational health issues, we've talked a lot about training workers on the occupational health risks that can occur on the site, and the importance of adhering to their safety protocols, providing continuous training programs, conducting daily, maybe 5-minute toolbox talks with your supervisors, and then having the supervisors conduct those with their employees is a really effective way of clearly communicating these health hazards and issues and your policies related to them. So managing these occupational health aspects effectively can help prevent long-term health issues for your workers, and it ensures the safe and healthy work environment on your construction site. All right, so as a safety manager, we always are striving to prevent incidents from occurring. But if they are to occur, we want, on our construction site, we want to approach the investigation of the incident from a comprehensive way in order to uncover the root cause of the incident and to identify prevention strategies that will mitigate this incident from occurring in the future. This will, of course, contribute to the overall safety of our site. Our incident investigation and construction in any incident investigation, we want to ensure that we are documenting and reporting what occurs in a systematic way. We are going to include a human factors analysis. We'll comply with any legal or regulatory regulations. We will also have corrective and preventative actions. We'll have post-incident learning and communication with our employees. And then we'll also have confidential reporting and protection to protect our workers' confidentiality. And all of these techniques help to uncover the underlying causes of the incident, but also enhance the overall safety culture on the job site. Our legal and ethical considerations in construction safety. We want to have a thorough understanding of the regulations and commitment to all of our construction safety practices to make sure that we are ensuring the safety of our workers. But there are legal considerations to consider, compliance with regulations. Like in the U.S., we've talked about, we have compliance with our OSHA regulations, and other countries have their own standards. So ensuring that you understand the legal and regulatory agency requirements of the country that you're working in will increase your safety on site, but it will also help to prevent legal penalties and promote a safe work environment. You may also have contractual obligations as a construction company and a contractor. You may have safety clauses within the contract you have with the company that you are performing the work for. So understanding and adhering to these terms is essential to avoiding any disputes and potential liabilities within that contract. And then you may also, and we also have workers' compensation and liability. So understanding how to properly manage your worker compensation claims and liability issues is vital as a construction safety manager. So this involves timely reporting of incidents to your workers' compensation insurance company. In the United States, or in where I live, it's considered timely to report those within 24 hours of an incident occurring. We are required by law to report that to our workers' compensation insurance company, or a worker could be denied coverage under that policy. We also need to maintain comprehensive insurance coverage to ensure that our assets and our employees are covered properly. We want to maintain documentation and proper record keeping at all times. Again, a saying I have, and I've heard from OSHA, if you didn't document something, then you didn't do it. Even if you did do it, you can't prove that you did something unless you have documentation to provide for it. So maintaining thorough records of safety inspections, incidents reports, and training, proper documentation can serve as evidence in those potential compliance audits and demonstrates that you have proactive safety management in place. Again, I mentioned it could be a written form that you use, or more commonly we're seeing and more readily available apps that can be used to help you manage this document and safety inspections and documentation process. Also, always stay informed about changes in safety regulations and standards to ensure ongoing compliance with any regulatory updates. So, these can happen at any time. Subscribing to your country's government regulation for safety and health. Like OSHA has a newsletter that you can subscribe to by email. And so subscribing to that and reading those emails as they come out is a great way to make sure that you're staying on top of any changes that may occur. And then, of course, we have that we've covered the legal considerations in construction safety, but ultimately we have the ethical considerations of prioritizing worker welfare over anything else. So not just only looking at safety because of the legal requirements, but also fostering a culture of safety where employees feel valued and heard, and that they feel that they're cared for. Being transparent, be honest and transparent about safety practices, incidents, and risks. Providing misleading information or falsifying information or failing to disclose hazards can undermine trust and safety within your organization. And promoting a proactive safety culture. So again, promoting a culture where safety is a shared responsibility. Encourage open communication about safety concerns and support initiatives that improve workplace conditions. Making sure that all employees feel that their voices are heard will help to contribute to that proactive safety culture. Ensuring that within all things you do, that all workers are treated fairly, regardless of their position or background, and that they have equal access to safety training and resources. This helps to address any potential issues with discrimination or unfair treatment with your safety practices. And make all your decisions based on the best interest of the workers and the public. So avoid taking shortcuts and cutting corners. These can compromise safety, especially if you're trying to do so because of a financial issue or any other reason. Always think ethically and think in the best interest of the worker and the public at all times. All right, we've talked about conducting construction site audits. So we want to conduct advanced safety audits and inspections on construction sites. This involves a thorough approach to ensure compliance with regulations and helps you identify potential hazards. A quick breakdown of this process. We want to review all site documentation. This helps you prepare for conducting safety audits. So you're going to assess the site's safety plans, risk assessments, and previous inspection reports. You're going to review any permits, licenses, and compliance records. Do you want to set your objectives? What are your goals and objectives and the scope of your audit or inspection? Sometimes when I do audits or inspections, my scope may be just looking at the heavy equipment and auditing that, or it may be just looking at a certain department. So you can look at the scope as an area or a hazard is a great way to focus your audits or inspections. You also want to assemble a team. You want to make sure you have a mix of safety professionals, site managers, and specialized inspectors if necessary to conduct these inspections. And then conducting a site walkthrough, having your boots on the ground, so to say, to inspect all areas of the construction site, including high-risk zones like scaffolding, excavation areas, and anywhere overhead work may occur. You want to check for adherence to safety protocols and proper use of PPE. So, we're checking when we do our site walkthrough, we're looking at the physical site, we're looking at the equipment, we're checking to see if everything is in good order, is our housekeeping in good shape. But we're also watching, what are the workers doing? Are they following proper safety protocols? Are they wearing their PPE the right way? So as I mentioned, we want to evaluate the workers' safety practices. Are our safety procedures and protocols being followed? We want to observe work practices and behaviors. We want to identify unsafe practices or deviations from the safety plan. And this isn't necessarily to get people in trouble, but it's to identify these things so that corrective action can be implemented and hazards and risk can be avoided. We want to verify equipment and tools are in good condition. Again, we want to make sure everything's properly calibrated and maintained. There's no damage to the equipment. You also want to assess the hazard controls that are available. Are they appropriate? Are they effective? Are they appropriate in terms of how many you have? Are they in the right places? You're going to check for proper use of fall protection systems, confined space entry, hazard communication, lockout, tagout use, all of those things you would be on the lookout for. You also want to interview personnel such as workers and supervisors to gauge their understanding of safety procedures and identify any concerns or gaps in their knowledge. And then, like we've talked about, you want to document your findings, document your observations, including any non-compliances, unsafe conditions, and areas for improvement. A checklist or an inspection form is especially helpful in these situations, but also, checklist to make sure you're being consistent and ensuring that you're considering everything during your walkthrough and your inspection, but also having a place for your own notes can be helpful in documenting your findings and implementing corrective action for the future. So assessing compliance, so comparing your findings against regulatory requirements, safety standards, and your site-specific procedures, identifying any areas of non-compliance, and then we'll develop recommendations, so proposing corrective actions and improvements based on the audit findings. Prioritize recommendations based on your risk assessment, so what level of risk we have and what's the likelihood of it happening and what's the impact on our site safety, and then prepared a detailed report. So summarize your findings and recommendations and prepare an action plan, prioritizing those things that you've identified that have high levels of risk, and then highlight critical issues that require immediate attention and follow-up actions. With your follow-up, you want to implement corrective actions, ensure that the recommended corrective actions have been implemented and monitored, verify that any deficiencies are addressed in a timely manner, and then do have continuous review for effectiveness of these corrective actions. If they're not effective, then you want to adjust those safety protocols and procedures as needed based on the outcomes. And as always, with everything, we want to strive for continuous improvement. So use the audit findings to refine the safety programs and procedures, promote a culture that values continuous improvement by integrating the lessons you've learned into employee training and safety practices. Advanced safety audits and inspections help us maintain a high standard of safety in our construction sites, and they ensure compliance with regulations and minimize risk. Continuous improvement in construction safety involves these ongoing efforts. I always say that there's never a finish line with safety, or there's never an end. It's always continuously improving. We can always be better. We can always be safer. We always want to enhance our safety practices, reduce risk, ensure the well-being of workers. And so we can approach it by using these regular safety audits and inspections, using incident analysis and feedback, providing workers training and education, implementing new technologies, and enhancing our safety culture. We also can use performance metrics in monitoring, manage our risk, ensure that we understand regulatory compliance so that we're always staying in compliance with that, engage our employees, and encourage a culture of collaboration, and then always document any findings that you have, any training that you do, and communicate everything with transparency to your employees and to your top level management. So continuous improvement fosters a proactive approach to safety Everyone's involved in identifying and addressing hazards. It's not just your job as the construction safety manager, and it allows us to continuously strive for safer work practices. All right, well, that is the end of our course on the Certified Construction Safety Manager. I thank you for your time today, and I wish you luck in your future of helping to protect the workers in your company. Thank you.